This is our final installment of Chapter 13. This is Part 3. Primarily, we're going to look at reflexes. We've looked at reflexes before, but we're going to have a look at them again. Here's some major characteristics of a reflex. Remember, a reflex is quick. It's involuntary. It's a stereotype reaction of, it can be glands or muscles to a particular stimulation. Reflexes obviously then require stimulation. They're not spontaneous actions, but they are responses to an input of sensory stimulation. They're very quick. They involve very few interneurons, and consequently we don't have much of a synaptic delay, so they're very quick. They are involuntary. They occur without you intending for them to occur. This is like when I'm driving and a bird is flying toward my windshield and I duck. It's involuntary, and then I have to laugh about it. Reflexes are stereotyped. They occur the same way every single time. Your reflexes, the response to the stimulus, can be a secretion from a gland, or it can be a contraction of any of the three types of muscle. Somatic reflexes are involving the somatic nervous system. They're innervating skeletal muscle, that is the muscle that normally you move voluntarily. Reflexes can be inborn. That means they are intrinsic. And again, they are rapid, involuntary, predictable response to a particular stimulus. Examples are in maintaining our posture, in controlling our visceral activities. These are reflexes. We don't have to think about that. They can be modified by learning or with a conscious effort. For instance, that puff of air on your eye. If you concentrate, you can keep from blinking your eye, even though the blink is a normal reflex. Some reflexes are learned, meaning they're acquired reflexes, and they're a result of you practicing. And a wonderful example of that is your driving skills. After you've been driving for a while, you simply have certain reflexes while you're driving. Functionally, we classify reflexes as somatic. Those are your skeletal muscle activations. And then we have autonomic or visceral. We're going to get into detail on those with the autonomic nervous system. This is the pathway of a somatic reflex arc, and that is you've got those receptors. They're in the skin, they're in the muscles, they're in tendons. Then you have those sensory neurons, those afferent nerve fibers that are going to carry the information from the receptors to the posterior horn of the spinal cord, or sometimes to the brainstem. Then you have the integrating center. In the integrating center, you most likely will have interneurons. This is in the gray matter of the nerve cord. Then you have your efferent nerve fibers. Those are your motor impulses that are the result of everything that happened in front of this, and they are going to carry the impulse to the muscle. When you get to the muscle is the effector, and that effector will carry out that response. Here's an illustration. We have this pin sticking in the skin. We have the receptor that is then going to send that impulse via the afferent neuron or sensory neuron into the spinal cord. Note, this is a unipolar sensory neuron, as most of them are. This cell body would be located in a dorsal root ganglion. Now we have the integration center. In this case, we have an interneuron here. And then it's going to synapse with the motor neuron. And that motor neuron is going to send that impulse to the effector, which happens to be the muscle. This is one that normally you would be practicing in lab, and that is we hit the patellar ligament, and what that does, we have a receptor, and that's going to send that afferent message to the nerve cord. Notice that dorsal root ganglion. Then we're going to synapse with the efferent or motor neuron, and it will travel to the muscle, and the muscle will contract. This I asked you to fill out in your work document. And so when we look at these, we see integration center. That's going to be in the gray matter in the spinal cord. That's E. We have sensory neuron, and that's carrying that impulse to the spinal cord. We have the effector. That's going to be the muscle. We have the motor neuron, which carries the impulse from the nerve cord to the effector. And then we have the receptor, which was here in the skin. People's spinal reflexes can be somatic or visceral, and it's a little bit of a misnomer because they can involve the lower regions of the brain. When a spinal reflex occurs, it does not have direct involvement with the higher brain center. That is, while the reflex is occurring. However, your brain will be advised of what happened. That's how you know when you jerked your hand back from that iron that you actually burned your hand. Now, one of the important things about reflexes is that we have tests for particular reflexes that can tell us the condition of the nervous system. Are they exaggerated? Are they distorted? Are they absent? These tests of reflexes can give us an idea of the health of the nervous system. And again, this is one of those things that you would be doing in lab. We have some somatic reflexes that involve what we call the muscle spindle. And these are stretch receptors that are actually embedded in your skeletal muscle. And they are among the proprioceptors that sense your body position and the movement of the body parts. These spindles will inform your brain of the length of your muscles and if they move. That enables the brain to send motor commands back to the muscles that can control your coordinated movement, your muscle tone, your posture. It's what keeps you standing upright when you're trying to stand up in a boat. Here's an example of a muscle spindle. And what we have in our muscles, we have extrafusal muscles that are going to be responsible for making a major contraction in the muscle. We have intrafusal muscle fibers that are going to let the brain know the position of the muscle. So you can see that we have sensory output to let the brain know the position of those muscle fibers. And then we have motor input that is going to bring about contraction of the muscle to maintain our balance. Continuation of the spinal reflexes. We have a stretch reflex, and that's going to involve that muscle spindle we just talked about when it's stretched and excited by internal or external stretch. Then we have the tendon reflex, and that's going to produce muscle relaxation and lengthening in response to the contraction. Here you can see the tendon bundles, and this is what we call the tendon organ, being innervated by the nerve fibers. And again, we are familiar with the flexor or withdrawal reflex. That's where you have a painful stimulus and you have an automatic withdrawal from that. Now, that information will be sent to the brain so that you realize that you did burn yourself on the iron. The cross-extensor reflex is pretty complex in that you have on one side of the body a withdrawal reflex. On the other side, the contralateral side, you have an extensor reflex. Here's an example of that particular reflex. And I see in my mind the Three Stooges when I think of this reflex. We pull the arm on one side and the other side whacks out and knocks somebody upside the head. Our superficial reflexes are very gentle stimulation of the skin. And one of the ones that you would be doing in lab is the plantar reflex, where you have to take your shoes off and gently stimulate the bottom of the foot. It tests for proper functioning of the lower spinal cord. So there are a number of the superficial reflexes that are very important in diagnostics. Here again is that stretch reflex, the patellar knee-jerk reflex. Here is the tendon reflex. This is practice that's on your work document. If we test the upper and lower motor pathways by stimulating the sole of the foot, we have the plantar reflex. On this one, we have ipsilateral withdrawal, contralateral extension, the Three Stooges knock you in the head, cross-extensor reflex. Rapid withdrawal of a body part because of the painful stimulus. That one, of course, is your flexor. This one prevents a muscle overstretching and maintains muscle tone. This is your stretch reflex. And then produces muscle relaxation and lengthening in response to tension. Contracting muscle relaxes when the opposite, its antagonist, is activated. And that is your tendon reflex. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about regeneration of nerve fibers. You know that mature neurons are amitotic. But if we have damage, the peripheral axon might be able to regenerate. So here's what happens. If the peripheral axon is damaged, we've got axon fragments. And that's going to spread distally from wherever the injury was. The macrophages are going to clean up the mess. Axon filaments are going to start growing through a new regeneration tube. That axon may regenerate and new myelin sheath form. The greater the distance between the severed ends, the less chance of regeneration. Here you can see a neuron intact, normally functioning. Then we have a trauma. And so here we have the cleanup of the mess. And we see that anything distal to that injury is going to degenerate. But we are developing growth processes. Here are our growth processes, and this is going to help us continue with a regeneration tube and start to replace what was lost. Here we have the retraction of those growth processes now that we've got everything going and we have continued growth until we get back to where we were. It's a very, very slow process. And you have to know that this is in the peripheral nervous system, not the central nervous system. Students in the central nervous system, we're not going to get regeneration. That's primarily because the oligodendrocytes have a growth inhibiting protein that keeps the fiber from regenerating. So the astrocytes are going to clean up the mess and are going to form scar tissue. So we will have permanent damage in the central nervous system. Hey, students, study, study, study. Know that from here on out, you have work documents on Blackboard that you will need to study. You need to fill them out. You need to check them as I go over them in these videos, and you need to study them. They are of utmost importance.